Tu Diep, hello, everyone. Love, when true, can both heal and destroy. For CEO James, his devotion to Tu Diep was so deep that he let the world slip through his fingers, losing power, wealth, and everything he once believed defined him. Now, with his company teetering on the edge of bankruptcy, the weight of an unbearable secret crushes his chest. Should he tell Tu Diep the truth and risk breaking her heart, or stay silent and carry the burden alone in the quiet between their breaths? James wonders if love this powerful is worth the ruins it leaves behind, or if, in the end, it is the only thing that truly matters. James stood frozen in the dim light of the warehouse, the air thick with the sharp scent of sawdust and oil. Moments earlier, he had been arguing with his father across continents about company honor and family reputation. Now, the reality before him was far worse than an argument. A broken lock on the storage door, empty cash boxes scattered across the floor, and muddy footprints leading out into the night. The betrayal stung deeper because he knew this chaos was not random theft. John's shadow lurked behind it. His father's voice still rang in his ears. "You are no longer in charge. From now on, they follow my orders." The humiliation was cutting, but James could endure it. What he could not endure was the thought of Tu Diep and little Nee being dragged into the ugliness of John's revenge. Earlier that day, while the town bustled with noise and laughter, Tu Diep had guided Nee's small hand through baskets of bright green okra at the market. She had smiled despite the blistering sun, teaching the girl to pick the tender pods customers loved. People greeted her warmly, the young mother with the sweet child, unaware of the storm gathering around her. James had watched from a distance once, unseen, and the tenderness of the scene had nearly undone him. She was his anchor in a world collapsing under financial scandal, theft, and his father's impossible expectations. John, once a trusted associate, had slipped past their defenses. Disguised as a drunk on a street corner, John's men had lifted company funds with cunning ease. The theft was only the beginning. Rumors spread that James's leadership was reckless, and even loyal workers hesitated. Some quit. Others whispered. His father, obsessed with pride, used the moment to strip James of authority. As rain threatened on the horizon and the lumberyard stood exposed, James gripped the edge of a workbench until his knuckles turned white. He thought of Tu Diep's laughter, of Nee clutching a cup of cool water, her cheeks flushed from the heat. The image collided violently with the possibility of John using them as pawns. Fear twisted into resolve. James would not allow history's sins, his father's betrayal of John's family years ago, to destroy the woman and child who had brought light into his life. He would protect them even if it meant standing against his own blood. He drove through the night, headlights cutting through sheets of rain, the steering wheel slick beneath his hands. His phone buzzed uselessly, Tu Diep's number unreachable. Panic threatened to overtake him, but he forced himself to breathe, to remember her strength. She was resourceful, even in the small, ordinary moments, bargaining at the market, soothing Nee with a lullaby, making a home out of nothing. By the time James reached the edge of the village, the storm had broken fully, drenching the earth and turning the dirt road to mud. He imagined Tu Diep clutching Nee, frightened by the thunder, unaware of the danger creeping closer. The thought hollowed him out. Inside him, love and fear fused into something sharp and unyielding. James stepped from the truck, rain plastering his hair to his face. Somewhere in the darkness, John was watching, waiting to strike where it would hurt most. James whispered into the storm, not as a plea but as a vow, "I will not let you touch them." The night around him was alive with threat, but also with his determination. James had lost control of the company, his father's trust, and perhaps his reputation. But to Diep and the baby, they were everything. And for them, he would fight through betrayal, weather, and even blood ties. The question was no longer whether he could bear the loss of pride. It was whether he could outwit John before the storm swallowed the people he loved. James took a step forward, each stride a promise against the darkness. The rain blurred the line between fear and hope, but in his chest, resolve burned steady. Whatever horror awaited, he would face it head-on. The storm raged through the valley, lightning flashing across the horizon like fractured glass. James pushed forward, boots sinking into the thick mud as he approached a deep small house. The warm glow of a single lantern flickered through the window, but something felt wrong. The door was ajar, rocking slightly in the wind. His chest tightened. He stepped inside quietly, his breath loud in the silence. The market baskets were overturned. A half-filled jar of rice spilled across the floor. Nee's small shoes were by the doorway. But there was no laughter, no hum of Tu Diep's voice, only the distant roll of thunder and the faint sound of water dripping. From the roof, Tu Diep, his voice cracked. A piece of paper was pinned to the wall with a rusted nail. The handwriting was jagged and hurried. If you want them back, come alone. Midnight. The old bridge. The note trembled in his hand as if it carried the storm's weight. For a long moment, James couldn't move. Memories of Tu Diep smiling in the sunlight, of Nee clinging to his hand, clashed with the image of John's cold smirk. This was the retaliation John had promised in whispers, the final move in a cruel game. James's mind raced. He had no weapons, no allies. His father had already stripped him of power, and the company was in ruins. The police would be too slow, and involving them might provoke John into something reckless. He had only himself. The old bridge loomed in his mind, a crumbling wooden span over a swollen river, a place where echoes carried and secrets were buried. He grabbed a heavy wrench from the workbench, hardly a weapon, but it was all he had, and slipped back into the storm. The drive was a blur of water-slick roads and growling thunder. When he reached the bridge, the river below churned angrily, swallowing branches and debris. Shadows moved at the far end. John's men, silent and waiting. James, a voice called through the rain, smooth and mocking. John stepped forward, the hood of his raincoat casting his face in darkness. Behind him, Tu Diep stood bound, her hair plastered to her cheeks. Nee clutched desperately in her arms. The child's eyes were wide with terror. "You took everything from me," John said. "Your family stole my land. You humiliated me. Now you will know what it's like to lose everything." James tightened his grip on the wrench, the storm soaking him to the bone. His voice was steady, though his heart hammered. "Let them go. John, this is between you and me." John laughed bitterly. "You still don't understand, do you? Hurting you means hurting them." A flash of lightning illuminated the bridge, throwing long, distorted shadows across the wet planks. James stepped forward, the boards creaking beneath his weight. His mind calculated every movement, the number of men, the slipperiness of the wood, the unstable river below. One wrong step, and everything could be lost. Tu Diep's eyes met his. Even through fear, there was trust there, trust that he would not fail her. It steadied him. "Take me," James said. "Let them go, and you can do whatever you planned." For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. John's men shifted uneasily, the storm howling around them. Then John smirked again, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Perhaps he had expected James to beg or break, but not this. James took another step, feeling the bridge groan beneath him. The wrench was heavy in his hand, but heavier still was the promise he had made in the rain. "I will not let you touch them." The river roared below, the night alive with tension, as the next move in their deadly game approached. Rain lashed across James's face as he edged closer. every creak of the bridge echoing like a drumbeat against the roar of the river. The lantern John had hung on a post swayed wildly, casting frantic shadows over the planks. Tu Diep's breath came in sharp, frightened bursts. Nee whimpered, clutching at her mother's soaked blouse. "Enough games, John," James said, his voice cutting through the storm. "You've already proved you can hurt me, but what happens when you hurt them? Do you think that makes you strong or just the man everyone already whispers you are?" John's jaw tightened. For a moment, the mocking smile faltered. The men beside him shifted uneasily. Lightning forked overhead, illuminating their faces uncertain, drenched, and cold. "I want you ruined," John hissed. "Like my family was. Like I was." James forced himself to breathe slowly. Every instinct screamed to rush forward, but one wrong move would send all of them into the churning water below. He loosened his shoulders, making himself appear smaller, less threatening. "You were wronged," he said steadily, "but punishing Tu Diep and Nee won't fix that. You and we can settle this without blood." John stepped closer, gripping Tu Diep's arm. She winced but held her chin high, even in fear. She looked at James with unspoken courage. It struck him with a surge of love so fierce it nearly broke his control. "I should throw her into the river," John spat, though his voice wavered. James took one more step, the bridge groaning beneath him. "And then what? You'll have nothing but ghosts." He tightened his grip on the wrench, his knuckles pale in the dim light. "You'll cross a line you can't uncross. Is that really what you want?" A long, tense silence stretched between them, broken only by the storm's fury. One of John's men glanced nervously toward the river. "Boss, the bridge," he muttered. "It's not safe." John's eyes flickered uncertainty, anger, and something like grief. Then, in a sudden movement, he shoved Tu Diep toward James. "Take them," he growled. "But this isn't over." James lunged forward, catching Tu Diep before she slipped. Nee cried out, burying her face against his chest. He held them both tightly, the wrench still gripped in his other hand, his heart pounding like a drum in his ears. By the time he looked up again, John and his men had vanished into the storm, swallowed by darkness and rain. For a long moment, James just held Tu Diep and Nee on the trembling bridge. The river raging below them, relief crashed over him like a wave, leaving him dizzy and weak. Tu Diep's tears mixed with rain on her cheeks. "I was so scared," she whispered. James pressed his forehead to hers. "I promised I'd protect you. I meant it." Together, they crossed the bridge slowly, each step careful on the slit planks. Behind them, the storm still raged, but ahead was the faint promise of light, a distant glow from the village, a fragile reminder that they had survived the night. As James guided them towards safety, he knew the fight wasn't over. John's hatred was a wound that wouldn't heal easily, and the company's troubles still loomed. But in the warmth of Tu Diep's trembling hand in his, and the weight of Nee's small arms around his neck, James found a reason to face whatever storms would come. The story of James, Tu Diep, and Nee teaches us that true strength is not about pride or revenge, it is about love, courage, and protection. James faced betrayal, humiliation, and danger. Yet he chose compassion over violence and sacrifice over selfishness. Even when everything seemed lost, his position in the company, his father's trust, and his reputation, his determination to protect the people he loved, gave him the power to stand firm. It reminds us that family is not defined by perfection or appearances, but by loyalty and care in the darkest moments. Pride can destroy relationships and drive people toward cruelty, as it did with John, but humility and understanding can break cycles of hatred. Finally, the story shows that even in the face of storms, whether they are literal or symbolic, we always have a choice to give in to despair or to hold on to love and fight for what truly matters.